You're locked in to the hottest station on the planet.
Resistance is futile. The revolution has begun.
You're listening to Rebelpreneur Radio, helping you break the rules and build the business you need for the life you want. And now, broadcasting his pirate signal
from somewhere beyond the status quo,
here's your host, best-selling author, marketing and media strategist, Ralph Brogden.
Hello and welcome to Rebelpreneur Radio. It's the show that helps you build the business you need so you can live the life you want. I'm your host, Ralph Brogden, leading you into the exciting world of entrepreneurship, rebelpreneurship, and solving real problems with real solutions. How can you achieve your business goals and really grow your business to the place that you want it to be and learn how to hold yourself accountable? That's probably the biggest challenge that a lot of people have when trying to grow their business. Today's expert is really going to help us figure that out and create a strategy for doing that. I'm speaking with Eric Garside. He is the Senior Director of Engineering for Freshly.com. He has more than a decade of experience building direct-to-consumer e-commerce platforms, business intelligence applications, enterprise software, and the teams that develop them. So, Eric, welcome to Rebelpreneur Radio.
Thank you, Ralph.
I think most of our listeners will be familiar with the Freshly brand. So
that's great to hear.
Yeah, I mean, this is really exciting, and to speak with someone that is behind the scenes of a major brand that is growing and is really creating value and solving problems for people in a way that might not have been possible just a few years ago. I want to hear how you got into doing this in general. How did you become a director of engineering, and then how did you get involved with Freshly? Tell us your story.
Great question. So, my pathway to director of engineering has been very bootstraps. I'm a self-taught programmer. I went to school for physics and philosophy, so not a lot of direct overlap with the software engineering world, as you might imagine. And the direct result of, a lot of my job training was real-world experience. So, I wasn't solving conceptual problems. I was solving real ones in front of us for companies that were paying me to, have a deliverable at the end of the day, and not like a high concept kind of programmer thing. So my interaction with the world of programming is much more applied than it is theoretical. And I think part of that is, what led me ultimately to become a director of engineering. A lot of the director aspect of things has more to do with managing work streams than it does actually doing the coding. It's very helpful to understand how that works. But in general, I think a lot of my pathway here has been learning how engineering works, how to build complex systems, how to, really handle complexity with elegance, and then applying that to business has been, I think, the real transition that kind of catapulted me into directors. So.
I love how, as an engineer, you are grappling with real problems and you have to deliver actual results, an actual deliverable at the end of the day, and not just an idea. And a lot of
Correct.
The people that I work with and have worked with in the past and taught, we're in a service business, and you're in a service business as well, but there's still a physical product involved. In a lot of business situations, it's very intangible. We're talking about transformation, or it's something that's very kind of nebulous and hard to get a hold of. And so I think it's useful to make that connection between here's a concept, but then at the end of the day, you've got to have something to put in the customers, the clients, something in their hands that they can hold. And it may be a tangible product like Freshly delivers, or it may be a tangible transformation in terms of return on investment, in terms of pounds lost in weight, or whatever it is we're trying to provide. So I love how you are building things that have a direct impact and a direct consequence. Tell us a little bit more about how you got involved and What are you doing on a day-to-day basis? Who is your client? Who is your customer? And how do you go about figuring and devising ways to deliver those tangible results?
Fantastic question. So, I guess let me answer that in a couple of parts. The first one is who the customer is, and that's internally in a corporate environment. That's other departments inside of the company. So, specifically as a director of engineering, one of the real values that I can bring is being a translation layer between the, kind of nebulous and hard to understand world of software engineering and translating that into something, you don't need to be a technical person to kind of understand what the mechanics are. And that's really the shape that I am in the company. I'm really an adapter layer between the very complex, and hand wavy, as I call it, world of engineering and the more tangible numbers driven business aspect. So, a lot of the value that I then, kind of bring is one of two things. Either it's difficulty assessment. So saying like, this project's going to be harder than that one. This one is, more the direction you want to go. Like, what are you trying to value proposition here? So, a lot of it is trying to work with people to understand how they're defining success and what is important to them. Because specifically as an engineer, it's very difficult to convey like how hard something is and why two things that seem almost interchangeable are actually not. Like if you want to change the sentence on a website, that's about as difficult as changing an image, about as difficult as changing the copy. But if you want to add a little animation, oh, holy crap, you just need 2 weeks of work now. So I'm trying to understand and navigate that complexity. It's very difficult for people. Even if you're an engineer, just because there's so many different things going on at any given time. So it really helps to understand how you define success, because for any given problem, there's 2 or 3 different solutions. There's the quick solution, there's the long-term, really overbuilt solution, there's the how much is this going to change solution. So trying to really understand, like, if you had to pick one thing that's the most important and you don't get to have two, what is the most important thing? And oftentimes just getting to that answer really helps you just take a lot of the other stuff and put it in the correct place. Because if you have 2 priorities, you really have no priority. And that's one of the real values that we use to try and divine with the business. Of course, everyone wants everything bigger, faster, cheaper, stronger. Like, yeah, but if you had to pick stronger or faster, and then once you actually put things in that context, it makes it very easy to try and do the assessment of, okay, well then do this project, is this, if it's those KPIs, those OKRs. So a lot of it is just really understanding how you think of success, because it's a very nebulous concept and it's really up for us to define. And depending on which way you pick, like certain projects are going to be a total alignment and like everything is going to work out great. And other projects are, you're doomed from the start. Why would you even have tried? So it's definitely valuable to think of that first, because oftentimes a lot of, especially as companies grow or scale, or even as they're on the small end, if you don't know what you're driving towards, it's very easy to get lost in the shuffle. And then you end up not knowing where you're trying to go anymore. And that's really, one of the things that kills a lot of companies is not having that good drive and that good direction towards what are your key metrics and how do you figure them out. So.
Excellent. And what you said so succinctly really has a lot of correlation to even small companies and service-based businesses like coaches. I think you would be an excellent coach, because really what we're doing as coaches and consultants is we are engineering a solution. And those
Correct.
3 things that you hit upon is so important. Clarifying expectations. How do you define success? Is it going to be the fastest solution, the least expensive solution, the most impact? What does success look like to you? And then prioritizing what the values are. And if someone wants it fast and someone else wants it as least expensively as possible, then those are conflicting values. I read something the other day from James Clear, and he was saying the same thing, talking about in the original usage of the word priority, it meant the one thing that is more important than everything else. But then as we have evolved in our corporate culture, we started talking about the first priority, the second priority, the third priority, and, priority 4, priority 5, priority 6. And his point is, if everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority.
Exactly.
So just clarifying those is, and this is what we're talking about, holding yourself accountable to your commitments with clear, thoughtful communication. I think what you just shared was so valuable in being able to do that. In the teams that you have worked with, the teams that you've led and the ones that you build, what is the biggest problem? And here again, we're going to prioritize problems, and there may be lots of different problems, right? But what would be the most common problem when you're trying to build a team and trying to get them to hold themselves accountable? What is the greatest obstacle to doing that successfully?
I think a lot of it is understanding expectations. And I think that would be my answer to the general broad problem that all these things are. People need to know what's expected of them. And when they don't, they feel stressed. They feel ineffective. They feel like they can't speak up at meetings. They feel like everything's a waste of their time. They kind of just put the blinders on and start working. And that can be at any level of the company, at any level of, like you would be a 1-person company, you could be a 50-person company, but not understanding expectations is ultimately the thing that causes the biggest amount of, I don't want to say toxicity, but it like poisons the well, if that makes sense. That starts a cascading set of events that, okay, well, I don't know what's expected of me, so I'm not going to put in more than 50% effort, and I'm just going to see how little I can put in until I get fired. That's like the mentality of the cog in the wheel. And if you structure your company that way and you structure your offerings that way, that's how people are going to feel. So I think generally speaking, like when you want to understand expectation, you need to start with yourself. Don't think of what are these people going to do for me? Really answer the question, like put the customer first. What am I doing for them? Like in this totally diverse landscape of 1 billion different offerings, why am I going to stand out? Who are the people that I'm here for? What is the message I'm bringing to them? Because too often, if you go broad and you don't, again, have that priority, that like a number one answer, all you're going to do is mix your message for a mixed audience, and you're not going to speak clearly to anybody. And you're going to make a 60% sale to somebody that would have been a 100% customer, and you're going to make a 20% pitch to somebody who's a 0% chance to be your customer. So you really need to understand, like, sometimes it's not good to get the biggest net. Sometimes it's good to get the sharpest spear. If you know exactly what you're hunting for, you go after it. And if you don't, you should just figure that out, because there's really never a good time to go broad. Broad is a very difficult thing to do. It requires a lot of infrastructure. You need to be specifically designed for it. And it's very difficult to manage that number of things simultaneously. Like, one thing that I'll say is, in terms of scaling is one of the most difficult things that most companies have a lot of trouble getting through the scaling bottleneck, because what works for a 5-person team doesn't work for a 50-person team, doesn't work for a 500-person team. So you constantly need to be looking at what are the expectations and how are they going to change as I change, as the market changes, as the landscape changes. Because if you're expecting things to remain static, you're already in a bad place. And that's really where expectations, I think, hang you up. If you're approaching how you're planning for the now, you're already going to be out of date, because planning takes 3 weeks, and then doing takes 3 weeks, and then it's already 6 weeks later. And now the thing you designed is already 6 weeks delayed. Now you need to be like, if you don't think 18 months ahead, you're going to get caught by the time you're done with a system that's already eroded, and you're going to have to just keep changing and keep changing. And that's not as valuable as if you just take a step back and go, what are we all here to do? And how can I activate everybody that wants to help? So they're not asking, how little do I have to do until I get fired? They're asking, what kind of value can I bring today? Like, what is today going to mean for me? Like, I want the people who work with me and for me to go home at the end of the day excited about what they did and what they accomplished and what they grew into and, what they learned. And if that's not happening, like, it's your job to push back and to change that, because ultimately that's really what defines success. Like, if people are activated and know what's expected of them, they're going to go above and beyond just as a rule, because that's how people work. And if they're not doing that, it's because you're not meeting them where they need to be met and giving them what they need to be given to be effective.
So much wisdom in what you're sharing there, Eric, because I hear the wisdom of marketing. I hear the wisdom of communication, strategic communication, also human resources. I mean, there's a lot of gold that you are bringing to the surface here. And it reminds me of something Vince Lombardi said. I think it was Vince Lombardi, that it's hard to motivate people if they're confused. If we don't know which direction we're going in, it's hard to give our all. So part of this is to understand where we're going. The other thing I liked about what you said is, I think people have the impression of an engineer as someone who is very rigid, systems oriented, doesn't like things to change. You are absolutely not the stereotypical engineer, in the sense that you're saying if you are trying to plan and keep everything static, you're going to be out of date and out of business. Your whole approach and strategy is we have to evolve, we have to pivot, we have to be flexible, and I think those are incredibly valuable lessons for a business wherever they are. If it's a one-person shop, if it's a small team, a small agency, or if it's a larger corporate brand, we've got to stay flexible. And that's probably even clarifying that expectation that we may not be in the same business 18 months from now as we are. Our customers may have changed. The economy may have changed, but we plan. Is there a logical limit in your mind to how far in advance you should be thinking and forecasting and planning?
Oh, sure. I mean, and it very much depends on how deep you want to go in terms of fidelity, right? Like, one thing that I would say is if you want a commitment that you can stand behind, you need to really do the planning to the day to figure out exactly how difficult something is. Because if I tell you it's going to be 2 weeks later, you're expecting it to be out. You're not expecting me to say like, oh, actually, I found another surprise 3 weeks worth of work while I was doing it because I didn't look closely the first time. That's not a very good commitment. And that's normally what happens with engineering. There's always that pressure of like, okay, well, I can't tell you exactly what it is, but tell me exactly when it's going to be done. And that's just, it's a law of physics that we can't do that. So being really clear about what something is and more importantly, why something is, I think really determines what scope of futureness you can have to it. For example, like we just finished a project that we had scoped. I think it took us 2 months from, soup to nuts to do all the planning for it. And then we went heads down and just continued to build this platform for the next 6 sprints, which is a 2-week chunk for us. So over that next almost 6-month period, after 2 months of alignment, we were able to just hit and go pure execution. And it was a pretty smooth process. We hit our deliverables. We knew what our goals were. And I think we missed by about 5%, which is like a week. So being able to throw a dart from 6 months away and hit, the 20 instead of the bullseye feels pretty good. And that I think is part of the, sorry, was that?
No, I think that's really good, because I'm just sitting here thinking how most small business owners, they don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow, much less what might happen 6, 12, 18 months down the road.
And that's a thing of scale too. Like at the size of a company we want to be able to commit to something like that because we have big initiatives around, we need a marketing launch around that date. So we have to be accurate. When you're small, deadlines are a killer. Like if you commit to something externally and then you're a little bit wrong, you're not going to do very well. But at the same time, you can't just be totally nebulous and like, oh, everything will just happen when it happens, because you're trying to provide a service generally, or you're trying to provide a good, and there's some kind of supply chain around almost everything. So really understanding like what is the scope of your actual deliverable is really challenging, but that really determines how far into the future you need to plan. If you're going to be working on things that take 4 months to build, you need 6 months of planning. If you're doing something where like every 3 days you're trying something new, don't plan 2 weeks ahead. That's a complete waste of your time. So it really needs to be, it's different for every business, different for every service, but the more you know about what you need to provide and how long it takes you to, complete a transaction, as it were, with a client, that's really where you want to set your expectations for planning. Because if those two things are aligned, you have very little waste. And if they're not, you're going to get this, either you have too much to do and not enough time to plan, or too much to plan and not enough to do. So finding that cadence is challenging, but you need to go into it knowing you're looking for a cadence rather than just assuming the first thing you pick is going to work. Like if you're not constantly looking for a better process, you're ultimately going to just settle, and that's what's going to end up killing you. So.
So much wisdom here with the things that you're sharing. And I see so many different ways to apply this in all kinds of business scenarios. One of the things that we are talking about is achieving business goals by holding ourselves accountable. What ways have you found are best for holding your team accountable is one thing. How do we hold ourselves accountable?
Great question. So I think a lot of it comes from, what are you putting time in for? Because that's ultimately where your accountability is going to come into. If you're creating the space for you to hold yourself accountable for something, then you can really make it valuable. And that's, I think, the most important part of accountability. It's less about the tools and it's more about the mentality. If the reason you're holding yourself accountable is because you want to grow and you want to achieve and you want to define success and then get it, that's very different than if you want to not feel bad about yourself because you didn't go to the gym or because you didn't, land that sale. So the value really needs to come from you and understanding I'm holding myself accountable because I know I can do more. I know I can produce more. And I know that if I set my sights to it, I can achieve it. So honestly, if you start there, you're already in a much better place than you're going to be otherwise. In terms of holding yourself accountable, some of the things that really work are numbers. Numbers are magic. They're something that is much more meaningful than quantitative. When you're able to take an idea and put a number behind it, the value it's indescribable. Like when I work now and I'm trying to coordinate the work streams of like 30 different teams working on like 50 different initiatives. And it's incredibly challenging when you get something that comes up and is like, my goal is that I want to attend meetings, and someone else says, my goal is that I want to, increase this number from 30% to 36% over this 2-week period. There's just so much more understanding, so much more knowledge, so much more clarity when you actually have clear numbers behind what you're holding yourself accountable to. Even if those numbers are challenging to compute, it's worth the time to do it. Because something that you can say about a number that is very difficult to say about a qualitative analysis is that you can plot it over time. If you say that you want to be spending 16 hours a week on phone calls with clients, that's a real number. If you say, I want to be spending more time on the phone with clients, what are you going to do with that? Like, if you don't know how fast you're going, you can't go any faster. So ultimately, business intelligence is the very core of business growth. If you don't know what your numbers are, you don't know your business. And if you don't know your business, you might luckily grow your business, but it's better to be good than lucky when it comes to business. And so ultimately, when you start thinking in terms of like, how do I plot? How do I plan? We're kind of lucky that we're in a capitalist society because we have an ultimate answer to all of that. It's the dollar. If everything resolves to money, you have a really easy way to take, and it's challenging no matter what you do, but having one consistent framework where you can assess success is exceptionally valuable. If you say, value for this project is we're going to sell 1,500 widgets, that's how you're defining success. If success is people like the widget, that's a very different problem with a very different approach, with a very, one's a marketing group, one's like a PR group. Like, you really need to understand why you're approaching your problem and see if there's good alignment in your solution. Because if you don't do that, like, accountability is going to fall down by the wayside. Because if you can't say for certain I failed or I succeeded, you're not really going to do it. Like, I'll leave it here because this is always something that gets very challenging in terms of the accountability piece. Is like, no one wants to get close and fail. And I say that's the exact wrong approach. Failure is what you want to shoot for. If failure isn't the almost certain option for whatever your initiative is, your initiative is not ambitious enough. And if it's not ambitious enough, it's not going to fail. Like, you need to hold yourself fear-wise that you're going to fail because that's the most likely, because otherwise you're never going to push yourself to see what you can achieve. And so I would say the real most value here, set your sights high, because what you think you can achieve in an hour is totally misaligned. What you think you can achieve in a year is totally misaligned, but in different directions. We undervalue what we can do in a year and overvalue what we can do in an hour. So give yourself a bigger scope and make that scope more ambitious, and then just kind of cut it backwards. A year has 4 quarters, a quarter has 3 months, a month has 2 2-week chunks generally. So you can start breaking down your goal into those deliverables. And if you say, I want to make $1 million this year, great. How much did you make last year? How much do you want? You just plot it out. And as soon as you do that, you can start seeing, I'm slipping, I'm ahead, I'm behind, I'm nailing it. And that gives you such a compass that you can keep yourself aligned with. And that really is the value. As soon as you start drifting and you don't have that feedback loop to keep you, realigned on the path, you're going to drift so far off. It's going to feel valueless to even try and get back on accountability. So you're just not. And that ultimately is the thing, like constant small check-ins with clear, true or false success. That's the key.
That's very valuable. What you're saying about numbers are magic is so true. If we can measure it, we can own it. And if we can own it, we can improve it. But But
Exactly.
if we don't measure it, we have no idea. It's just kind of a subjective feeling that we have. I feel like I should be doing more, or I feel like I'm doing too much. We don't have a clue. So I really like this concept you introduce of quantifying our ideas, quantifying our performance, quantifying our goals. We all want to make more money. How much? What does that break down to? What do I have to do to get to 6 figures a year? What do I have to do to get my business to 7 figures, 8 figures, or beyond? And there's a process for doing that and breaking it down, but we have to quantify that. And everything in a capitalist society, as you said, Eric, everything revolves to money. And, maybe, we can define success differently, but we can all resolve our business success down to dollars, to profits, to sales, and then to quantify the activities it's going to take. How many phone calls, how many conversations, what's our closing ratio? These are things that we can grab hold of. So it's important. Business intelligence, knowing our numbers. It's just as important for the one-man operation as it is for the large brand like Freshly.com. Eric, what are you working on right now that really illustrates what we're trying to talk about, achieving business goals, setting your sights higher? What are you working on right now that's got you really excited?
Awesome question. So right now there's, I think, one real big thing, because, I'm big on priority, and that means one thing. So
Yes.
Right now, our focus is really trying to tie together a communication framework for the company that embodies these ideas in a way that summarizes where we are. Because one of the things that we have done a very good job of is very fine-grained understanding of how the work is getting done and how effective we're being. And we've done an amazing job identifying and optimizing that. But as things move up in summarization, it gets much less clear. Having fine-grained detail is awesome when you're looking for that, but when you want a quick executive summary, it starts falling down if you have to sift through 15 emails and piece together 18. You just want a green light, red light. Are we doing well or are we not? So trying to find a way to take, a diverse set of people with a diverse set of goals, some as, directional as money and sales, and some more, again, hand-wavy is how are our customers feeling about things? How do they like the taste of food? We're really doing it's a very challenging thing to try and make something that complicated a subjective number that's valuable and meaningful. And that's really what those teams end up trying to focus on, is sifting through different strategies that will actually allow you to achieve that, which again is really hard. And that's, I think, the thing you need to be expecting. If you're not, nailing it, that's okay. You're not expecting to nail it. But if you don't keep refining that process, you're just going to fall down there. So.
I feel like, Eric, that you have given me an education in building business systems that actually work, as well as creating the parameters and the commitments with thoughtful communication, defining success for everybody, clarifying those expectations, prioritizing the values, and keeping the main thing the main thing. This has really been useful, and as I say, I think it certainly applies to businesses of any size, particularly Rebelpreneur businesses, where very often we are doing things all by ourselves. And that really underscores the importance of having the numbers, knowing exactly what it is we need to do to build the business we need so we can have the life that we want to have. So this has been incredibly valuable. Any final thoughts that you would like to leave us with, maybe as a bottom line reminder?
Yeah, I would say the one big takeaway, if you remember nothing else, is write it down. Because if you don't write it down, there's no record, and you're going to want a record. And one of the big challenges is trying to recompute historical data. It takes maybe 20 seconds a day to jot down a number that gives you some sense of how things are going. And it takes you 20 hours to go back through 6 months of time and try and figure out what that number was. So take the time and just do the bookkeeping, and you'll thank yourself later.
Excellent words of wisdom from Eric Garside. He is the Senior Director of Engineering at Freshly.com with a decade of experience building direct-to-consumer e-commerce platforms, business intelligence applications, enterprise software, and the teams that develop them. So you can check Freshly out at Freshly.com, of course, and you can thank Eric Garside for his hard work behind the scenes. Eric, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your time with us today on Rebelpreneur Radio. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Ralph. I love being here.
You've been listening to Rebelpreneur Radio with Ralph Brogden. Download the show notes and much more at rebelpreneur.com.